For 10 years, Daniel lived alone in the woods, carrying a grief too deep for words. A forest ranger by trade, but a broken man by heart, ever since the accident that claimed his wife during a blizzard. He had sealed that chapter, until one snowy morning, a bear appeared on the edge of his clearing. Not just any bear. This one wore a collar, and inside it, a message written in the delicate, unmistakable handwriting of his late wife. It was impossible. Unreal. Yet it was real. The letter mentioned things only the two of them ever knew. Things that had been lost to time, or so he thought. What followed was more than a mystery. It was a journey of healing, connection, and something no science could explain, the return of a love through the wild. Because sometimes, the forest doesn't just keep secrets. It delivers them back. The wind howled through the trees like a voice from the past. Daniel's cabin, buried deep in the Alaskan wilderness, creaked softly as snow piled higher along the logs. He lived here not just for the silence, but to disappear from a world that had once given him everything, then taken it all away. He stirred his coffee in silence, staring through the frosted window. The same view every morning, pine trees heavy with snow, the white sky melting into the white ground. But today, something was different. A massive brown bear stood just beyond the clearing. Not moving. Just watching. Daniel froze, his hand gripping the rifle leaning by the door. He'd seen bears before. They roamed these woods like shadows. But this one, there was something odd. A collar. The bear had a worn leather collar around its thick neck, barely visible under its fur. Not a tag or GPS tracker. Just old, cracked leather. His heart pounded. He stepped out slowly, boots crunching against the snow, rifle slung low but ready. The bear didn't run. Didn't growl. It simply turned, walked a few feet, then stopped again, glancing back as if to say, "Follow me." "Okay, what is this?" Daniel whispered. Half against his better judgment, half gripped by something deeper, something like curiosity or fate, he followed. The bear led him only a short distance, then settled near a tree and sat down, unafraid. Daniel stayed a few yards back. He noticed something tucked under the collar, a folded slip of yellowing paper barely clinging to the edge. Cautiously, he moved forward, reaching toward the collar as the bear stayed still. Not aggressive. Not even tense. He pulled out the paper with trembling fingers and stepped back. The bear stood up, let out a low exhale, and turned to disappear into the trees. Daniel was left alone. With the note. He unfolded it. There, in faded ink and looping cursive, was the unmistakable handwriting of his wife. The wife who had died 10 years ago. He stumbled back, nearly dropping the paper, his breath caught between a gasp and a sob. The words read, "Daniel, if you're reading this, then the forest gave you back what I never could." Daniel sat on the steps of his cabin, the note trembling in his hand, snowflakes melting on the faded paper. He read the message again and again, each time hoping it would change, that it would make sense. But it didn't. Not logically. His wife, Claire, had died a decade ago. A blizzard, a missed radio call, a failed rescue. He'd buried her memory under layers of wilderness and guilt. And now her handwriting had returned, wrapped around the neck of a bear. The letter was short. "Daniel, if you're reading this, then the forest gave you back what I never could. I've always believed the wild listens. I told it everything, about us, about you. If something finds you, listen. Don't run. Just trust it. Love, Claire." He whispered her name aloud. Claire. A name he hadn't dared say in years. Inside the cabin, he pulled out an old journal, Claire's. He hadn't touched it in a decade. He compared the script. It was identical. Same loops on the L, same broken E. No forgery. No trick. This was hers. But how? Could she have left it behind before her death? No. This paper was recent, not weather-worn. And how had it gotten into the collar of a wild bear? He paced the cabin, every creak of the floor sounding like the cracking of his past. Logic clashed with something deeper inside him, the knowing that this wasn't a coincidence. The next morning, Daniel set out. He followed the bear's tracks, deep and wide, trailing through the snow-covered woods. It was as if he was chasing a ghost. Hours passed. Trees blurred. The air was heavy, not with cold, but with memory. He reached the old ranger station, now collapsed and long abandoned. He hadn't been here since the accident. And then, movement. The bear. It stood across the clearing, watching again. This time, Daniel didn't bring his rifle. He stepped forward. No fear. Just the sound of breath and snow crunching beneath his boots. The bear didn't retreat. It circled the collapsed cabin and approached something buried beneath a tangle of vines and debris. Daniel dug through the snow-covered brush and uncovered a rusted lockbox. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, another note. Another message. This one read, "You left me here, but I never left you." His eyes filled. He dropped to his knees, overwhelmed. The forest hadn't just remembered. It had preserved something sacred. A secret Claire had hidden, waiting to be found. Daniel cradled the second letter like it was fragile glass, his breath fogging in the cold air. His mind reeled with questions. "You left me here, but I never left you." Claire had written it, no doubt about that now. But how did she know he would one day return to this forgotten place, to this buried lockbox, guided by a bear? The answer wasn't in the paper. It was in the woods themselves. He looked up. The bear hadn't moved. Its amber eyes stared, almost expectantly, as if urging him forward. Something about its presence wasn't threatening. It was ancient, knowing, like a guardian. And its color, it hadn't been manufactured recently. It was old. Faded. Like something from years ago. Daniel traced his memories back to the stormy night he lost Claire. She had insisted on doing a final radio check before the weather closed in. They'd argued. He had wanted her to stay back, to play it safe. But Claire never feared the wilderness. It was her cathedral. The collapsed ranger station had been her last known location. Now standing among its ruins, Daniel began to search. Beneath broken beams and snow-covered furniture, he uncovered more: Claire's old mug, her thermos, and a journal wrapped in waxed cloth. He took it back to the cabin, his hands trembling as he opened the pages. Every entry was written in Claire's voice, poetic, wild, full of reverence for the animals around her. But one passage stood out. "If anything ever happens to me, I hope the forest carries my love to Daniel. I've seen how the animals remember. Maybe, just maybe, they'll carry me to him when he's ready." Daniel couldn't breathe for a moment. She had known. Somehow, she had believed that the forest, the very place he'd hidden his pain, would one day lead him back. That evening, the bear returned again. This time, Daniel didn't just watch from inside. He walked outside, stood still. The bear sat. For several minutes, they just existed, man and beast, both bound by something beyond explanation. Then, the bear did something Daniel would never forget. It nudged open the cabin door with its massive paw, walked to the hearth where Claire's rocking chair still sat, and gently tapped it, as if inviting Daniel to remember her warmth. He fell to his knees, overcome. This bear wasn't random. It wasn't wild in the way most animals were. It had been touched by something. Guided. Maybe even trained. But by whom? That night, Daniel stared into the fire and finally let himself grieve. He whispered to Claire. Apologized. Thanked her. Told her everything he never could when she was alive. And the bear stayed on the porch, resting by the door like an old friend standing watch. By morning, a new note appeared, wedged beneath the bear's collar. It said, "You're almost there. One more truth. Follow him at sunrise." Daniel looked up just as the sun broke over the trees. The bear was already walking. And Daniel followed. The snow beneath Daniel's boots was soft, crunching gently as he followed the bear deeper into the forest. The early morning sun painted the pines gold, but there was still a hush to the air, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Daniel wasn't sure where they were going, but he didn't question it anymore. The bear moved with purpose, not like an animal wandering or foraging, but like a guide that knew exactly where to take him. They crossed a half-frozen stream, wound through bramble-choked undergrowth, and eventually reached a spot Daniel hadn't seen in over a decade, a steep incline with a hidden trail behind a fallen log. Claire used to call it the secret climb. It was a place they discovered together, a ridge with a view that stretched beyond the treetops, where they'd once carved their initials into an old cedar tree. Daniel stopped at the base of it, overwhelmed. How could the bear know? Still, he climbed. Each step stirred memories, hikes with Claire, laughter echoing through the woods, long conversations as dusk fell. And then, at the top, the view opened like a window to another life. Daniel stood silent, watching the sun rise higher. The bear waited, then turned its head toward a boulder nearby. At first, Daniel saw nothing special. Then he noticed, tucked beneath a crevice in the stone, a rusted tin can, partially covered by moss. Hands shaking, he pulled it free. Inside, a photo, faded but intact. Him and Claire, both grinning, her arm looped around his neck. Behind it, a note. If you've come this far, it means you're ready. I knew the forest would carry you back when your heart could bear it. I left one more gift, and you'll need him to find it. You'll need him. Daniel looked at the bear. It sat quietly, gazing at him with those deep amber eyes, not wild but almost mournful. Intelligent. And in that stillness, Daniel realized, the bear hadn't just been leading him. It had known her. Maybe not as a person knows another, but through kindness, consistency, and time. Claire had cared for this bear, maybe even raised it, long before she disappeared. The bear turned again, lumbering toward a thick patch of trees. Daniel followed. The terrain grew steeper and more rugged, but eventually, they reached a clearing, and at its center stood something that made Daniel's heart stop. A small wooden structure, almost camouflaged by vines and snow, a shelter, carefully built. Inside was a radio, weather-beaten books, a cot, and a carved message above the door. Love remembers. Tears welled in Daniel's eyes. This was Claire's final outpost. Not the ranger station, this. A place she'd built for herself, in solitude, maybe even for safety. And here she'd likely spent her last days, not lost but alive, intentional, waiting for the forest to bring her message to him. The bear paced near the edge of the shelter, then laid down, as if it too had found peace. Daniel stepped inside. On the cot lay Claire's ranger hat, folded neatly beside her old compass. There was another note under the compass. If the bear led you here, then you've seen what I saw, that love is not limited to time or distance. You gave me the courage to face this alone. And now I give you this place, to remember, to heal, and to live again. Daniel sat, overwhelmed with emotion. The forest had kept her memory alive. And through a bear, once feared now trusted, her spirit had reached across time to find him. That night, Daniel built a fire. The bear stayed close, resting by the doorway as if protecting something sacred. Daniel whispered into the flames, "I found you, Claire." But deep down, he knew the truth. She had never really been lost. She was always waiting for him, and she trusted the bear to bring him home. Daniel woke to a quiet rustle outside the shelter. The fire had burned low, casting amber light across the cedar walls. The bear still lay at the entrance, but it was restless now, its large head tilted toward the trees, ears twitching at the morning sounds. He stepped out quietly, taking in the stillness. Overnight, the forest had transformed. Snowfall now clung to branches in soft drifts, and the sunlight filtering through the trees made the air shimmer. It felt like a place suspended between time and memory. The bear began to walk again, slow and deliberate. Daniel followed, not asking where or why anymore. This time, the path led deeper into the forest's untouched belly, where human footsteps were rare. The trees grew older here, thick, ancient trunks with bark as rugged as stone. Eventually, they came to a rocky ledge, where a narrow path curved downward toward a grove of aspens. And there, nestled under a wide outcrop, was something impossible. An old hand-built cabin, not the ranger station, not Claire's outpost, but something else entirely. The door creaked open easily. Inside, empty food tins, tools, blankets, books, and a crate labeled, "Wildlife Rehab Project, Ranger Claire D." Daniel's heart slammed in his chest. He moved quickly searching, and soon found a weathered notebook wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, Claire had documented everything. Each page was a record: food schedules, injury notes, sketches of animals, and one creature's name repeated more than others. Cub number 29, male, orphaned, estimated 6 months. Unusually intelligent. Responds to vocal cues. Follows Claire without prompting. Deep bond forming. Next to it was a photograph, blurry, but clear enough to show Claire kneeling beside a small bear cub, feeding it from a bottle. Its eyes were unmistakable, golden brown, soulful, curious. It was him. The bear. Daniel sat back, stunned. The animal who had led him through frozen rivers, up mountain trails, back to Claire's shelter, wasn't a stranger. He was part of her life. Raised by her. Loved by her. And now, trusted with her final message. He flipped further through the journal. One final note stood out, scrawled more urgently than the others. If anything happens to me, he will remember. I've trained him to follow the scent of cedar oil. I've left markers. I hope one day, he finds Daniel. He'll know what to do. Daniel's eyes welled with tears. He understood now. The compass had been doused in cedar oil. The trail markers. The shelter. The photograph. It was never random. Claire had planned it all, trusting that the bear she raised would carry her final hope across seasons, across silence, across grief, and find the man she loved. Back outside, the bear waited. Daniel walked toward him slowly, holding the photograph and the notebook. "You knew her better than anyone, didn't you?" he whispered. The bear didn't move, but in his stillness, Daniel felt a calm understanding pass between them, not words, but something deeper. A bond neither time nor species could explain. The bear gently nudged the notebook with his nose, as if acknowledging the truth. And Daniel, for the first time in years, felt his chest ease. The ache remained, Claire was gone, but the mystery, the silence, the not knowing, it had finally lifted. In the days that followed, Daniel repaired the old cabin, splitting logs and fixing the roof. He returned often to Claire's outpost as well. The bear stayed nearby, sometimes watching from a distance, sometimes resting just outside the fire's glow. But he never left. Together, they existed in a quiet partnership, one born not from fear or training, but from love, memory, and trust. And each morning before the sun crested the hills, the bear would walk to the clearing, where Claire's initials remained carved into the old cedar tree. He would sit there for hours, waiting, remembering, as if he too carried grief in his own way, wild, unspoken, and sacred. And Daniel no longer wondered if animals had souls. He knew it. He had met one. Weeks passed. The snow began to thaw, and spring crept in quietly, dripping from branches, softening the earth. Life stirred in the valley again, birdsong returned, and tiny shoots broke through the frost. Daniel stayed. Not because he had to, but because something inside him had changed. Each day, he read a little more of Claire's journal, not just for the information, but to hear her voice. Her words were more than documentation. They were love letters to the wild, notes of hope, faith, and the unshakable belief that one act of compassion could ripple through time. The bear, now known to Daniel as Cedar, remained close. He would vanish for hours, sometimes a whole day, but always return to the edge of the woods, watching, protecting, waiting. One morning, Daniel found a small wooden box buried near the roots of the cedar tree. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth like the journal, was a letter. It was addressed to him. "If you're reading this, it means he found you. I never knew how to say goodbye, Daniel. So I chose not to. I always believed the forest would take care of what I couldn't finish. And it did. Take care of him. He is not just a bear. He is a bridge. A reminder. A part of both our worlds. Love always. Claire." Daniel pressed the letter to his chest. A lump formed in his throat, and for a long time, he couldn't speak. But in that silence, he felt her presence more deeply than ever before. He looked toward Cedar, who had emerged from the trees and now sat quietly beside him. "You kept your promise," Daniel whispered. "And so will I." Daniel turned the cabin into something new, not a ranger station, not just a home, but a sanctuary. A place for animals in need. A place where lost things could be found again. Where stories weren't forgotten, but passed down. Cedar became a legend. Hikers sometimes caught glimpses, a giant bear with amber eyes standing on a ridge at sunset watching. Never threatening. Always still. News spread. A few tried to come looking for him. Daniel never confirmed the tales, but he left a small wooden sign on the trailhead. "If you see him, don't be afraid. He's not lost. He's remembering." Sometimes, children from nearby towns visited on school trips, learning about wildlife conservation, and the story of the bear who followed the scent of cedar to bring a message of love. Daniel would read from Claire's journal, and every time, he ended with the same words. Love leaves tracks. Sometimes, even a bear can follow them. One evening, as the stars blinked awake across a velvet sky, Daniel sat beside the fire outside the cabin. Cedar lay nearby, his breath slow and steady. In his lap, Daniel held a blank notebook. He began to write. Today, I saw him place a pine cone on the stump where Claire used to sit. I don't know why, but it felt like a gift. The fire crackled gently. Owls called in the distance. And somewhere in the woods, another bear cub, alone and trembling, stepped onto the trail. The same trail Cedar had once followed. Maybe, just maybe, he would lead another lost soul home someday. Because some stories never end. They echo. They return. They grow in the hearts of those who believe. Sometimes, the wild carries messages we're meant to find, not just with our eyes, but with our hearts. This wasn't just a bear story. It was a story about love, loss, and how even nature remembers those we've lost. Paw print sparkles.